Thank you and welcome everyone to this breakout session in the Arms Control Association's annual meeting. I'm Zia Mian. I'm at Princeton University's program on science and global security, and I also serve on the board of the Arms Control Association. And so welcome to this conversation with a very special guest. Ambassador Elaine Whyte is a Costa Rican diplomat and academic, and in 2017, she presided over the United Nations conference that negotiated and adopted the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which is a landmark in the history of international efforts to deal with the threat from nuclear weapons. She's had a distinguished career as a diplomat and official in the service of the government of Costa Rica on many human rights, disarmament, foreign policy, and related issues. So let me ask Ambassador Whyte to make her remarks, and then we can have a conversation since time is short. But the focus of the conversation today is about the implications of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which enters into force on the 22nd of January, 2021. And so let me just ask two questions for Ambassador Whyte. And the first is, what does the entry into force of the treaty mean for the international community? And the second question is, what happens once the treaty has entered into force over the coming months and years as you see it? So please, Ambassador Whyte.
Thank you very much, and hello from Costa Rica. I think in order to address the implications of the entry into force of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, one must not isolate the analysis of the treaty from what is going on in the international community at the moment. So the first remark I would make is that the very fact that the TPNW has reached the thresholds of 50 ratifications for the entry into force in the context of this extraordinary year is a remarkable aspect of the treaty. Indeed, the unprecedented combination of health, economic, social, and environmental crises did not distract the political leadership of the signatory states from the objective of having a legal prohibition of nuclear weapons. Neither did the political demarches against the treaty. This is remarkable because you might have thought that the situation that was created by the pandemic could have meant a little bit more difficulty in reaching out or in following up on the ratification processes at the domestic level for the countries. So it is remarkable that the commitment has been unbreakable. And going forward, the discussion of the impact of the TPNW cannot be isolated also from the mood and the overall evolution of the international community. In 2021, whereas the political leadership across the globe will be fundamentally preoccupied with a very concrete problem solving, providing for basic human needs and economic recovery. Also all under the concept of building back better. In the security field, the security and disarmament field, most states in the world see with grave concern the heightened tensions among great powers, the upgrading of arsenals, the escalatory doctrines that also loosen the rules on the use of nuclear weapons, that lead to the erosion of the nuclear taboo, and especially with grave concern because of the unraveling of the arms control agreements. And while we are seeing this at the top tier of global geopolitics, instead of following suit that trend of withdrawing from treaty obligations or institutions, most countries of the world have expressed an unshaken adherence to international agreements as the backbone of cooperation in all forms, in peace and security in particular. And in terms of non-proliferation and disarmament, the entry into force of the TPNW is an expression of and a reaffirmation of the historical and irreversible renunciation of nuclear weapons undertaken by most countries of the world. So the first remark is that in the midst of a fundamental crisis for the international community, in that exceptional stress is being put on the global architecture, the first impact is that of the unequivocal commitment to the pursuit of a world free of nuclear weapons, and towards the maintenance of the international rule of law. And that, I think, is very good news. Besides the good news of the entry into force only for the campaigners of the TPNW. Let's see. Okay, the plane is taking off now. In that same logic of the international rule of law and architecture, in the legal normative field, as of 2021, the disarmament and non-proliferation architecture will have a treaty that will come to complete the landscape of existing prohibitions of weapons of mass destruction. So the entry into force of the TPNW will definitely exert its influence. Furthermore, it is the first time that this new or non-orthodox conceptual approach of nuclear weapons will be incorporated in a legal instrument, drawing the attention of the discussion towards the scientific evidence of the catastrophic consequences that any use of nuclear weapons would have on human beings and the environment, which actually is a fact that links nuclear weapons and, let's say, the international law of nuclear weapons and their impact with the other bodies of legal and scientific knowledge, such as international law, international humanitarian law, sustainable development, the international environmental law, international human rights law, all of which point to the interconnected nature of state legal obligations and to the concept of human security that was already adopted by the UN at the end of the last century. So this unprecedented combination of crisis and the imperative to meet the basic needs of the world population do center the discussions in 2021 and perhaps much beyond on concrete expressions of human insecurity. I think the statement by the newly appointed National Security Advisor of the Biden administration, Jake Sullivan, precisely mentioned this aspect when he was announced to the press, that together with addressing the enduring threats such as nuclear weapons and terrorism, the elected president has tasked the security team to reimagine national security to the unprecedented combination of economic, climate, health crisis, democracy, technological disruption, and other non-military sources of security. So having been pursued and negotiated in this 21st century, the TPNW does contain an expression of this new conceptual shift towards a more comprehensive perception and construct of security. The whole experience of the movement of the humanitarian impact, the way the treaty was negotiated, will bring additional expectations to the disarmament and non-proliferation architecture and debates. And I think even innovations, not only those expectations are not only held by civil society, but also from states, that there will be more dialogue with science to provide for evidence-based policy options, besides the orthodox approach of abstract theoretical constructs, and to have a more comprehensive approach to incorporate this human security dimension. So what is happening in the world now, it is very much in line with this concern that the international community has about a broader picture for for the discussions. These characteristics will be in the treaty, will be strengthened with the entry into force, because Article 12 of the treaty mandates states parties to engage with non-parties towards the universalization, and also the recent engagement by, or the increasing engagement by parliamentarians and cities about nuclear weapons is a trend that is going to continue on in 2021. But the architecture will not only be influenced by the entry to force of the TPNW, but also from the kind of dynamics that will result from the post-pandemic world. We hear very much, very often, the concepts of the Great Reset from the economic point of view, building back better in the recovery process. And those concepts are going to exert their influence in all fields of the international community. There is also a widespread aspiration that the international community will see renewed dialogue and adherence to rules, organizations, treaties across the board, being in climate change, trade, in security, in technology, in human rights. So with the new administration in the US, there is this expectation that we are going to see renewed dialogue and new terms of engagement. There, I believe there will be a growing demand that the current international architecture moves on to function in a manner more consistent with the complex and interconnected nature of today's challenges. That is, abandoning the silo perspective and making real innovations in functioning like an interconnected system. And the security and disarmament non-proliferation field does not escape this increase in demand. We are indeed facing 21st century crisis with mostly 20th century architecture. So in this case, I bring up the call made by the High Representative of Disarmament Affairs back in 2017, Mrs. Sumi Nakamitsu, in the sense that we need to abandon the dynamics of binary dialogue or binary opposing dialogue between the Prohibition Treaty and the NPT. I would add to that that we need to see an end to this confrontational, adversarial, and competitive narrative that puts the Prohibition Treaty and the Non-Proliferation Treaty in competitive and even adversarial terms. They are not competitive. We already know that. The legal prohibition is a fundamental component of the elimination of any weapons. The treaty comes to strengthen the legal and normative basis for a process leading to the total elimination of nuclear weapons, and comes to provide for an effective measure towards nuclear disarmament in the terms mandated by Article 6 of the NPT. So one of the most important tasks towards the future is to achieve a virtuous articulation between all the components of the current architecture, including the various normative components, institutions, processes, and negotiations. And the value added of each instance, of each regime, must be recognized with respect and with clarity of purpose towards an integral and hopefully a more systemic operation. The international community already has experience in building these platforms for connecting different treaty regimes, for instance, in the field of human rights, where we have already some decades of building. Out of 10 treaty regimes that were negotiated in very different historic times, there has been a process of building a systemic approach and also steering groups and steering committees that promote dialogue among the chairs of the committees and so on and so forth. So there are very interesting experiences in the UN on how to start thinking about a complementary systemic approach that can help us overcome these this confrontational approach that we have seen in the last years. So that is part of what is going to happen after the treaty enters into force, that we need to build bridges and approaches to see how we can put the whole architecture to work as a system. That is our belief. But the TPNW already has an inherent approach towards complementarity. The TPNW results from a negotiation mandate that was straightforward. Negotiate a prohibition instrument that would strengthen and complement the current architecture, including the NPT and other components of the system, and to make a clear link between the prohibition norm and avenues towards the total elimination of nuclear weapons. So the complementarity mandate was achieved by several means. First, the TPNW already incorporates or includes incorporative preamble provisions to connect the treaty with the other related regimes, to avoid clashes between different bodies and to establish an institutional approach. Therefore, the treaty departs from the reaffirmation of the role of the NPT as the cornerstone of the nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation regime, and also recognizes the CTBT and nuclear weapon-free zone treaties among the main regimes. And second, the delegations permanently deliberated to ensure that the provisions in the new treaty reinforce, complement, build upon, or refer to the provisions of the NPT and the CTBT. So there is not a need to further elaborate on article by article how that was achieved, but I would like to mention only a couple of examples of this complementarity that is very needed at the moment. So Article 3, for instance, strengthens the existing safeguard system by requiring all parties to the treaty, to the TPNW, to maintain at least their current AIEA safeguards arrangements in place at the time of the entry into force. So for the majority of countries, that would imply the additional protocol, and with the TPNW, it is legally, every country is legally bound to maintain the additional protocol without the possibility to withdraw from it. So for those states parties or they are not of the NPT, without the AP, the minimum requirement would be the comprehensive safeguards agreement, while including the possibility to further strengthen such standards without prejudice to additional instruments to be adopted in the future. So there are many instances that we can explore how to better link the legal obligations and the instruments that are already established in other treaty and treaty regimes to see how we can better reinforce all the functioning of the regimes, the verification mechanisms, and the including the meetings of state parties, agendas, and so on and so forth. Let me say just one example. The moment in the year 2017, while Costa Rica was chairing the negotiations of the TPNW, it was the Netherlands who was chairing the negotiations of the NPT. And it was very useful for both presidencies to sit together and have very frank conversations about the challenges that we both faced and how to be very respectful of the work that each president was undertaking under different regimes. So there are many instances of that we can look at to see how we can go from the entry into force of the treaty towards the preparation of the first meeting of state parties and towards a dialogue with the rest of the architecture in terms of the real functioning of the overall architecture. So let me finish by saying that the TPNW does bring a political, conceptual, but also methodological innovation not only because it was negotiated in the 21st century, but also because it was the inherent approach towards complementarity, because it was mandated by the General Assembly to do so, but also because it was the overall political will of the delegations to go on this path of further linking all the components of the machinery. So 2021 will then start with a reinforcement and a reiteration of non-proliferation, disarmament legal obligations, and a reiteration of the adherence of most states in the world to the international rule of law and to legal obligations. In the midst of this uncertain context, it is important that this is the result of 2020, an expression of the belief in the rules-based order. This remains firm and unshaken, and so is the inherent desire for engagement, for respectful dialogue, and for constructive action. And we all are looking forward towards this new phase of international cooperation, of renewed dialogue and renewed terms of engagement. Thank you, and I will be more than ready to interact with with you or the participants.
Thank you, Ambassador Whyte. Unfortunately, we are now only a couple of minutes before the end of the time allotted to this breakout session. But in the questions that we've received for you, the common theme, one common theme has been about the role of the umbrella states, the countries mostly in Europe that shelter under the US nuclear weapons use guarantee as part of NATO commitments, and other partners in similar situations elsewhere in the world. What relationship do you see between those states who technically are non-weapon states, even under the NPT, but are under a nuclear umbrella in the context of the TPNW?
Well, I think any change would have to, or any exchange with the umbrella states would need to start by a discussion on the conceptual framework of the relationship they have, or the perception they have of security based on nuclear weapons. And to foresee, as is the case of even in the US, to foresee how to reimagine, to use the words of Jake Sullivan, how to reimagine the security of those countries in this 21st century with a set of challenges that are very particular to this time in history. So the engagement, state parties of the TPNW are going to be engaged. We are going to engage with all countries, with nuclear weapon states, also with umbrella states. And it is very interesting to see how we can start conversations that can take us to common understandings about how to come closer in our visions and in the process of building new security paradigms that, of course, we are seeing now that there are many more threats and many more, threats that come from non-military sources of disruption of civil life. So there is a need to see how we can accommodate all the components of the new conceptual basis to come together in the architecture and the political dialogue as well.
So thank you, Ambassador. I've been told by the Arms Control Association staff that it's time to wrap up. I'm sorry to our audience that we didn't have time to get to more questions, but with that encouragement of the value of dialogue and persuasion across diverse points of view, one of the things that made the TPNW possible, I'd like to ask the audience to join me in thanking you for spending this time with us. And so thank you, Ambassador Whyte.
Thank you very much, Zia.
And to remind the audience that it's now time to move to the next part of the agenda for the Arms Control Annual Meeting. And if you look at the chat box, that's available on your screen, you'll see the link back to the main plenary session, which is the link that you might have used at the start of the meeting. Please click on that link to continue with the next session, which will include the result of the poll that was taken earlier. So thank you all for your attention, and I apologize for not getting to more of the questions. So please enjoy the rest of the meeting.
Thank you. Thank you.